Now I'm excited to introduce our two speakers. A principal based in TBG's Dallas office, Jodi House joined TBG in 2011 and leads a team of landscape architects and planners that specialize in civic engagement and commissions. Jodi employs a collaborative project approach and works closely with colleagues, consultants, and clients to realize each project's vision. Her extensive experience includes creative spaces for all abilities and ages, for cities to regional parks and trails, with a keen awareness of the site context and an underlying emphasis on the end user group. Molly Plummer is the Parks for People Program Manager for the Trust for Public Lands North Texas office. She holds a Master's of Landscape Architecture from the University of Texas at Arlington and has a background in studio art. Her research is focused on how social resiliency and the urban built environment are impacted by historical landscape architecture and planning mechanisms. At the Trust for Public Land, Molly manages a number of projects, including a GIS-based citywide planning initiative, a crowdsourced park quality assessment, a watershed level master plan for parks and trails in southern Dallas, the design and development of several park projects in Dallas, in addition to organizing the community engagement and participatory design that accompanies these projects. Today, they are presenting their talks on Why Connection Matter, Designing for Community Resiliency. 5 Mile Creek meanders through southern Dallas for 15 miles before reaching the Trinity River, home to some of Dallas' most important natural landscapes. The creek and its many tributaries carve a series of valleys across southwest Dallas. The watershed drains approximately 70 square miles of the city and is a vital component of the city's natural and ecological infrastructure. Analysis by the Trust for Public Land indicates that of the nearly 187,000 people who live in the 5 Mile Creek watershed, only 53% have access to a park or a trail within a 10-minute walk. The 5 Mile Creek Urban Greenbelt proposes 23.2 miles of trails, as well as the creation of 4 new parks. Once complete, over 56,000 people will live within a 10-minute walk of the Greenbelt network. In addition, the plan provides a holistic framework for balancing the environmental stewardship, recreational amenities, and equitable development. The planning process incorporated input from local stakeholders, including civic leaders, educational institutions, neighborhood associations, and community groups. 4 public workshops, numerous interviews, and a survey generated reports and ideas that informed the design of the 5 Mile Creek Urban Greenbelt Master Plan. The project is facilitated by the City of Dallas, the Trust for Public Land, and TBG partners, with extensive community input to shape the vision and design direction. Through the telling of the project story, participants will gain a broader understanding of the differences between a historically segregated southern Dallas and North Dallas based on real-time data, especially in regard to green space, shared public space, and connectivity, and learn that through empathetic design, community engagement can be a powerful tool. The 5 Mile Creek Greenbelt Master Plan will demonstrate what it means to design with the community for truly inclusive design outcomes, how important political engagement is in communities that face inequalities, and the importance and implications of a community vision. The project is a great example of how communities and neighborhoods, nonprofits, and the private sector are teaming up to influence a new type of development, and the importance of these models to getting work done for a non-traditional client, especially for communities who might not be able to employ traditional design modes. Welcome, Jodi and Molly.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. We are so excited to talk to you about 5 Mile Creek. It's a project that Jodi and I worked on a few years ago between our firms. For me at Trust for Public Land, it's really set the groundwork for the things that I've been doing following up this planning work. And what we're here to talk to you about, like Lisa said, is why connections matter, both between us as professionals, between our organizations with communities, our organizations with other community groups, and how that landscape architecture can provide a design framework to make an impact in communities. And we had a big vision for 5 Mile Creek that we partnered with the community with that we're going to talk about. But all those, connections are really important to getting the project done and keeping moving forward. So if you go to the next slide, I don't know how many people are familiar with the Trust for Public Land since we're at Labash and not at a conservation conference, but the Trust for Public Land is a nonprofit organization. We're a 5-0, we're a nonprofit, and we work across the country. We have national offices and we have field offices where we work in specific areas. Our mission is to provide land for people. And so that means for us right now in Dallas, we're really focused on the 10-minute walk, which is an idea that everyone deserves a park, trail, or green space within a 10-minute walk of their house or their home in the United States. And we do that through a variety of ways, all of which you're going to see in this presentation. But we do that through advocacy, we do it through planning, we do it through buying and selling, or not selling, buying and gifting land to public agencies, and by designing and building parks and raising money to do that. And we couldn't do it without partnering with great landscape architects like Jodi and TBG. This plan would have never happened without our partnership. And so we're super appreciative for that. Jodi, I'll let you talk a little bit more about TBG.
Yeah, so TBG, we're a group of landscape architects and planners. Some of our passions are creating these civic places where the residents feel like the outdoor spaces and environments are their homes. It's creating memories and histories with people so they have fondness and connections to them. We know that nature changes children and adults and their mindset. And so how do we get that to the majority of people? TPL brought this project to our attention back in 2018, I believe. And we said, yes, we would love to become a part of it, and started crafting the mission with them. We were fortunate also to partner with the City of Dallas Parks Department, as well as for Oak Cliff, who really became a voice of the community and a strategic partner to bring about the community to all of the events, to make sure that their voice really had a say within this project itself. So thanks, Molly, for having us being a part of the team.
Yeah, well, I cut my teeth at TBG. I worked as an intern there when I was finishing my master's, so I have a lot of love for TBG. But I have to point out for any aspiring professionals here, TBG did this work pro bono that you're going to see in the rest of this project, especially because it's a planning project in a part of Dallas that funding is not easily available for. Equity is a huge part of our mission. And because of the work we got to do together here, we're now working on a $13 million park project together out of this. And those kind of partnerships are super important in making these things happen. So we can get into it. So if anyone here is familiar with Dallas, even if you're not, you'll see the downtown sign. The CBD is just like any other city close to the center. We are a definite suburban Sunbelt city, pretty spread out, but there isn't quite a whole lot of available land mass for big parks, except for in the kind of southern sector. 5 Mile Creek is a beautiful watershed. It's 70 square miles, and you can see that it is huge in terms of the land mass for Dallas. You can go to the next slide. And so here you can see 5 Mile Creek, at TPL, we're always looking for ways to connect people to parks, whether that's through more naturalistic parks, design parks, schoolyards, creative placemaking. But we felt this was a huge opportunity, just having hiked the area and visited a few of these trails, that the creekway in 5 Mile Creek is really beautiful. And it looks like it's a limestone bottomed and sided creek that has escarpment. It's got beautiful bottomland, riparian corridors. And we thought it was a really good opportunity because, you know, to be blunt, there are beautiful creeks in parts of the city that have more money. And this is an area that, you know, has some economic struggles. And we thought it would be a really great opportunity, but we wanted to talk to the community about it first and make sure that that's something that they wanted. Like I said, it's 70 square miles of drainage in the basin before it hits the Trinity River, which if you're not familiar with Texas, is also the water supply for Houston. So it's a pretty important river for the state of Texas. In the population, it's over 180,000 that live in this corridor. 56,000 are children. 51% are low-income households, which is a higher percentage than we see in other parts of the city broken out. 61% are African-American, 33% Hispanic, and 20% are white. And we like to call that out because Dallas was traditionally a very segregated city, which is something that we are always thinking about in our work. And when we talk and work with communities, typically Dallas's population is broken out in closer to thirds. And so having 61% African-American is a pretty significant number and something that we definitely did consider in the design, but we made sure we got a lot of feedback about, because everyone on this webinar has a different perception and experience with nature. And that is really important to account for in design. You can go to the next slide. And so I described 5 Mile Creek, but this is what it looks like. We've got we've got prairie, wildflowers that are sort of naturally occurring along the streamway. This is actually a stormwater, you know, this is a portion that's owned by or managed by Dallas Stormwater, and on the left, and it's really beautiful. And if you had not been to this part of Dallas and looked for it, you wouldn't see it because it's not been made into accessible park space. You can go to the next slide, please.
Oh, did it go?
And so I mentioned the 10-minute walk score earlier. We're always trying to increase that 10-minute walk score. I'd love it if people in the chat right now could respond and tell me what you think makes a whole and healthy community. So I'll let people do that and I'll talk while you're doing it. But what we always talk about is that, you know, we need to have access to food. We need to have a roof over our heads if that's what we want. Parks is not probably the top survival priority, but in order for us to have a connected and healthy community, we need to have third spaces, is how we feel. And we believe that parks and public spaces do increase that sense of community and connectedness, and do add to and create healthy neighborhoods. In Dallas, you know, when I started working at the Trust for Public Land, we were under 60% in terms of having access to a park or trail within a 10-minute walk of your house. And we are now up into the high 60s and gonna be in the 70s sometime soon. But we still have to work hard. You know, lots of cities that are a little denser have 100% access and are working on getting better park amenities, and we continually need to advocate for that. I'm gonna read some of the chat responses because I like them, especially because we're all landscape architects. Friendly neighbors that look out for each other. I love that. I think that that is a really important piece of connectivity and how you know each other. Safely walk to a grocery store, park, or school. I agree. Like, we all want good schools in our neighborhoods and we want to be able to get food safely. Connections to people and nature, I agree. Economic security and self-determination, I totally agree with that. And that's, you know, while parks and trails, especially in this plan, we feel create a space to to be more equal and equitable in the distribution of how our public space is laid out. You know, parks and trails do have economic returns for the people who own houses around them, and they have real health implications that will show too, especially in Dallas, where we have to deal with the urban heat island, a ton of concrete from 80s development, and, you know, 70s, you know, infrastructure. And that does, I think, add to the ability to have that economic security. Yes, public transportation too. Jodi's going to talk about that later, how these trails are planned. Something we think about at TPL all the time is how you connect you know, places to one another so people can efficiently get there, but how also do you fund these things? And you do fund a lot of trails by connecting schools, grocery stores, institutions, parks to neighborhoods so that people have better access. And so that was something that went into this planning process. But thank you for your responses. Jodi, we can move to the next slide. So together we came up with, you know, this vision, and we crafted this with community members. But we wanted to develop a new master plan that incorporated parks, trails, and green spaces for 5 Mile Creek and the tributaries I just showed, using the tributaries as a guide to where we could plan those parks and trails and provide recreational opportunities. And, you know, really give people access that made them feel comfortable in the natural beauty of the corridor. So we can move to the next. So out of that together, we both did a lot of community engagement about what was going to go into the plan from a vision standpoint, and then a ton of technical work. I think TVG walked like so many trail corridors, but through our partnership and working with the city of Dallas, we added 23 new miles of trails to the city of Dallas master plan, trail master plan. We also identified gap areas that currently weren't funded, or there was an opportunity to go ahead and move funding towards or advocate for that were already in the trails master plan to close gaps. And then we planned for 4 big parks. And I'll give you a pro planning tip. Those are not shown on any public documents because it could increase the real estate value of those pieces artificially. And so we have those privately and we'll tell them to anybody. But until we have a sense of whether they're purchasable or not, we don't release them to the public, but we do release the trails. We can move forward to the next one.
I think another thing to hit on this is that while this was the vision in the master plan, those 4 new park areas today are being designed and starting to be implemented. So not only was this vision, this master plan set forth within the 9-month time period, now within 2 years of the adoption of that by City Council, we now are getting funding and doing documentation to get these built within it. So that it has become an actionable plan that the community can see the city investing within their area, which has been a big issue. It's that all these plans come and nothing comes to fruition. So TPL was able to say, we're going to do this plan, get it adopted, and now it's getting implemented.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I think you're right about that, Jodi, and people don't realize that, you know, there are some plans that sit on a shelf or that really are just vision. There's a lot of actionable plans. Most public, my experience in public work funding or advocacy is that you need to be able to show people why something needs to happen and that you have a plan to get there. And you know, there's tons of issues that cities are dealing with, and being able to do that, especially through this plan, has been really amazing. 1, 2, the 4. I think a question I get a lot is, Molly, you just showed all this red area with all these park gaps. Why are there only 4 new parks on this plan? And it's because through the engagement and us thinking about kind of the environmental opportunities, there's a lot more opportunities for parks in the corridor, and we're working on other ones too. But the 4 parks are signature parks that are over 40 acres, provide an environmental benefit, and were decided upon through the values that we'll show you that we came up with through the engagement that we heard from the community. And something else that was really important is that there needs to be an equitable development portion of this work when we are talking about equity. I think that a lot of times we do talk about gentrification or artificial investment or we wanted to both honor and provide some layers of protection for the communities who are working with, who do want these things to happen. They do want the 5 Mile Creek corridor to be developed. They don't want to have to leave. They want to be able to enjoy it. And that's something that's really important to our core values when we're talking about designing for the 10-minute walk. It's for the people that live there right now. We want to grow with those communities if they want to grow. We want to help with that. We want to help communities stay. And so it was really important that every piece of this plan was vetted and created by community engagement by the residents who live there. And we need to be advocates and well-versed in stuff that is outside of traditional landscape architecture. If you're working in a community, you do need to know the people who are working in housing or be familiar with the issues of food security or just, general development. Even if you're doing design, if you're a community advocate, you need to be in partner with other advocates. And that doesn't mean we all have to be housing experts or we all have to be food security experts or economic development experts. But it does mean that we need to be able to talk the talk and advocate for when a community tells us something. And so we included equitable development portions that we heard from the community at their request, but also worked with outside organizations once we heard those things to develop some protections and some opportunity for better equitable development in the corridor. And it doesn't say it on here, but some of the things that are specified are just always working with, if there's an opportunity to work with, hire, train, pay people who live in the neighborhoods you work in, you should hire local artists. We have committed to doing all those things, and part of this plan is that it's public, and we hope other people commit to do those things as well. So another thing is that Dallas, we need a lot of environmental resiliency here in Dallas. We also wanted to comment, since this is a vision plan and we came up with trails and parks and the way a vision should look in the community, we also wanted to, help others or help the community continue to cast that vision for development that isn't just related to parks. So Trust for Public Land is working with TBG to build a park, and we have other park projects, but we want people who are coming in to build an apartment to look at this and design for environmental resiliency. People who are doing a roadway improvement to, call and look at the plan and, use some of the more progressive green infrastructure and environmental resiliency pieces that we think about when we're talking about design. And I think that that's important to the community. I'm sure there's people from across the country on this call, and we all have various levels of zoning, but I can tell you in Texas, where zoning is flexible, having these things actually written down and actually documented that community wants them is really imperative to advocating for or against good or bad development in the future.
The plan also gave implementation ideas for this green infrastructure, so that as a developer, they came with ideas from the cisterns, green roofs, bioswales, all of those things that are inherent to us as landscape architects, but maybe developers don't look at. And it helps tell them the importance of the 5 Mile Creek watershed environmentally. Not only that impacts it to this area and the parks and getting people access to those, but downstream from it. So if we can clean it upstream within these systems, it only makes it better downstream for others. And that was important to give them those tactile ways to actually implement it into their projects.
Yeah, and so this is an example picture that is a TPL project in Los Angeles called the Green Alleyways. So it's something that we've thought about in Dallas, but if you're familiar with Los Angeles, every drop of water that doesn't get absorbed by the ground or go into the storm system, if it runs off, it goes back into the ocean and then is unusable. And so the green alleyways have a connected pipe system to capture and reuse that water and capture it before it escapes from being usable. And they also serve as a public space. They serve as a parkway to connect students to the schools. Their purpose, the green infrastructure purpose is really important, but it creates a safe route to schools for the children in those neighborhoods also. So this is the last thing I'll just hit on, and then I think Jodi, we're gonna talk together about some things, but when we talk about equity and communities and people's experience with parks and nature, the most important thing that we can do is to design for safety. And that doesn't mean necessarily, that means sometimes that the pavilion isn't the, architecturally insane, cool pavilion. Sometimes it is, and sometimes that's a huge point of the park, but sometimes the most important thing is, where are you going to put the parking? Does it have bollards? Is it well lit? Do people feel safe? Do people have clear sight lines? We really looked at a lot of NRPA's kind of design for safety tools, and we actually formed a steering committee for this project and another park project where we had community members who had both neighborhood expertise, wisdom about their neighborhood we needed to know, and then people who could provide input based on their experiences. And we actually had a police officer, a community police officer who is CEPTED trained, advise on some of the pieces for designing for safety. But it's the number one thing I hear when we're talking about parks and trails is maintenance and safety. And we felt like we heard it so much, and we felt like as designers, I'm sure, I don't know how you felt, Jodi, but when we were talking about this as designers, we think, of course we need to design for safety. Of course that we want the park to be safe. Of course we're going to get more eyes on the street. Of course it's going to be great. We're going to be safe. But like, the community needs to see that. They need to hear it. They need to hear that their voice was heard in those pieces. And, we do still have to remind some people that that is a pretty important design criteria.
I'll say with the safety, that maintenance item on the last one has become a huge tone for other cities as well in underserved communities for their park systems. We can give them the nice fancy park that day one looks beautiful, but if it's not maintained 5 years down the road, the citizens don't take ownership over it. And when they really have the ownership over the park, they have eyes on the park. That makes it more safe. They gather there, it becomes their space. And that's really what we want to design with any of these park systems, is having the community feel like owners over it, because that inherently will just make it safer in and of itself. So that hits home to this this project, as well as several others we're working on.
So I forgot, we're going to talk about community engagement now. But I'm going to tell you right quickly how we did the community engagement, just the framework that we use at TPL. We know that community engagement needs to be flexible according to the communities you're working with. And we have to balance what we're funded and required to do with all the things we want to do and need to do to really engage with communities. It's different in every neighborhood. But for this particular project, we had 18 stakeholder interviews with various organizations, community groups, and community leaders in the neighborhood who have worked institutionally for a long time. So I think it's pretty important to acknowledge I am white and I'm from Dallas, but I'm not from 5 Mile Creek. And I have a lot of expertise from being a landscape architect working in the corridor, but I'm not from there. And so we have to talk to people from the community and the neighborhood. And we learned so much from these stakeholder interviews. They really give you an opportunity to have honest dialogue and close conversation with somebody. We did have 4 public charrettes, which we learned so much from, and they were amazing. And that you need both. You need to be able to have a big community meeting and design together and talk through those things, and to have individual one-on-one conversations with people and learn about their experience more explicitly. We also had a community survey And these are the formal things we did. We also attended, I can't tell you how many neighborhood association meetings we attended, how many police crime watch meetings we attended. Anytime that there is any kind of a community meeting in a neighborhood and you're doing community work, that's where you're gonna get really amazing feedback, even if you're going and talking for 5 minutes and talking to people after the meeting. And so that's what we did for the community engagement for this piece. And it was about a 4 or 5 month period, followed by putting the plan together.
And to highlight that, 4 Oak Cliff is a community group who everybody knows them within this community itself. So it was really inherent upon us and the viability of the plan to make sure that they were there and helping us speak the truth of what this could provide and what it should provide. And I think garnering that local community group to help spread the word and create that comfort level with each other helped make this successful. It would have been one thing if TPL and TBG just went to the community and started doing these interviews and workshops, but the turnout was far greater because the community knew 4 Oak Cliff was also backing it and behind it and understood the importance of this. So I think finding those local groups on any project that can help pull together the community is very important.
Yeah, and you'll see in that bottom right picture, Taylor in the center, Taylor Toynes is the founder of 4 Oak Cliff. We maintained a really close relationship with him throughout the plan and working on several other park projects. And he's actually now on our national board. And Derek Batty is the taller gentleman in the back. And he is he's also the community liaison for South Oak Cliff High School. And the stuff that you learn just from working with people, I mean, I think it took a year and then somebody told me, you know, Derek Batty is the president of South Oak Cliff or the mayor of South Oak Cliff. I said, I know. But the biggest success I think we can have as landscape architects or as designers or as community engagement professionals is to provide communities the tools to advocate and to, if they want something to happen, is to provide the tools and to be the support to make whatever it is happen, in this case, a parks plan. I can't tell you the countless number of people that said, oh, well, I'll take this map and I'll do this engagement exercise with my neighborhood, or you come and just give the 5-minute and then I'll do the questions. And that that's buy-in, that's success. And I think that that's something that we should aim for on all of our projects, and that we always have to figure out, how, you know, what, how, and why at the beginning of a project.
Perfect. Oh. The surveys coming out of them, we had great responses, and obviously some of the numbers show how much trails really mean within the corridor and to the community itself. Security, very successful. The one thing not showing on here is that the trails for exercise and fitness at 88% was great, but there was also the trails as just a multimodal device of getting people from location to location, as well as their comfortability within the natural environment. So we, I forget how many questions we had and how many responses there were, but they really helped us craft what this could be and what it should be. So pulling in now to talk a little bit about the plan, and I'm going to go super speedy because we love to talk community engagement and we talk that a lot. And so to come to fruition with these community parks and trails, Paul Quinn College is one of the community colleges there. They're very active, and they became a great resource for us, hosting events as well as pulling support for the community. And just the fact that he was so outspoken about this project helped it become successful. Oh, so our vision themes that presented itself after we took in all the community surveys were urban refuge. We know that in these large cities that are dominated by impervious surfaces and hard physical elements, these refuges provide a sense of relief, that connection to nature that clears your mind. It's very calming. All of the data and history and knowledge that we have, we know it's there. So we definitely wanted to make sure that these pieces pulled people into that true natural area. When we do that, we want to restore and remediate it. These creeks are getting to the bottom of their limestone and they're starting to pull outwards, and we're losing space and land. So how do we restore those natural connections, pull out the trash, remediate the edges so that the creek system in itself remains whole? Not only are we going to give the people out there, but we want what they see to actually be natural. Research and institutions, there are several schools in here, 2 colleges. How do we partner with them to create learning labs and opportunities so that students can now study ecology, water quality, environmental issues that become prevalent? It helps us get the good word out about landscape architects and sustainable engineers, those things that really can help root our cities within this urban refuge. So we're partnering with them on not only the community engagement, but pulling in their classrooms at ever increasing younger ages so that they can hear and learn about us. Recreation and health, the 10-minute walk obviously was the backbone and the spine to getting this thought about, and honestly, the genesis of the idea. So making sure that what we do provide roots within that 10-minute walk.
Yeah, I just add that something that, you know, we've kind of hinted at in the engagement is that what we heard is that a lot of the quote natural areas, like you'll see in this picture right here, are blighted spaces, areas that haven't been taken care of, they haven't been maintained, they're overgrown, people feel unsafe in them. And so while we want to provide access to the natural beauty that we know exists, or in some cases needs to be remediated to get there, we need to design for a gradient, meaning that people have different levels of comfort within nature, and not everything is the experience of nature that you see in a conservation book. It should be a very designed park. It should be a very designed trail with opportunities to go deeper into that experience.
Perfect. So going into the weeds, and this picture is one of those ones that shows you everything this watershed has become, with the erosion off the creek banks, the trash, the sediment collection, the invasive species. All of those things make it uncomfortable for the user and become the place where you want to turn your back on and not engage with, regardless of your comfortability of if it's manicured or not. No one's going to go here except us when we're trudging trails and finding that look. As we started to map all of the pieces of the equitable development, the 5-minute walk, the existing trail systems, the watersheds, we came up with some focus areas, and those became the places where we wanted to provide the connections between things, the connections to each other, and the connections to the actual trail systems itself. Each one has a series of outlooks and goals in and of itself. So all of those will be their own projects and have to dive deeper. But globally, we were able to figure out which ones really provide the connections and fulfill the watershed and the trail master plans. This is just one example of the focus area. We kept it very still, high level. This one of the key goals was to provide the loop around it so that the trail eventually has that loop system. You can see this one also connects us to South Oak Cliff High School, a woody branch trail down at the bottom. And this one became the genesis of phase 1, didn't it, Molly? Where we now have the Alice Branch Creek Park going in as well.
Yeah, that's our first demonstration project. It's a 2-acre park, and that we're beginning construction on any minute. We've gone through permitting, and we're going to have open by the fall. Actually also in this, we are working on the land acquisition for that big kind of triangular green piece where the Woody Branch Creek Trail is. And we actually could purchase that land and work with the city on that because it has so much good riparian kind of forest stock that we're able to work with the city on their reforestation fund to acquire that land for one of the 4 big signature parks in the corridor.
Perfect. Within our vision in the document itself, we talk about each focus area and the goals that it presents, the physical conditions and the alignments and why the alignments are the way they are, so that whenever this comes to fruition, there's already a guidebook in hand. It just becomes the actual specifics of what we can and can't do within each piece itself.
And I think that this is really important to highlight how much work TBG did on the plan, like technical work and being with us on the engagement, is that, you know, you never know who you're going to talk to, but things are not as easy as saying there needs to be a trail here. There's a lot of stuff that goes into the inventory, the analysis, is it feasible? And having all this stuff easy makes it easy for groups like us to advocate for it, either fundraise for it ourselves or help cities write grants to fundraise for these trails or work with other organizations. And having all these things written down in a guidebook and not just a map is super, it's imperative to being able to move forward on some of these pieces.
And not only the written word, but the visual communication that goes in hand when speaking to the community or to those groups that you want to fundraise with. So we did a lot of overlays over what is existing and how do we make it proposed and safe, and make sure that we're showing those items that the community has told us would make them safe within a space, being it lighting, benches, wide trails that become multimodal. So we're really wanting to overlay and show them that we know the neighborhood and we know what can and cannot occur in spaces, crossing creekways, and you know, not letting those watersheds become barriers within a community, making sure neighbors on one side of the creek can be friends and have easy access to each other. And even the big roadways and infrastructure projects, utilizing some of the space underneath them to provide those physical trail connections and cleaning them out and keeping them safe. But these visuals, hand in time and time again, we're realizing that we can mark it out on plan and show the fancy diagrams that get us to them, but these are what not only sell the project, but also convey to the city council that they need to adopt this plan and that the plan can be realistic in the end and what it's going to look like. And the 3-dimensional shots where you can see yourself in the space become super real to the people who are approving them. The roadmap going forward, we settled on the focus areas and where they occur. And then we started to put priorities on them as well as costs, so that we knew how to, not only the focus areas need to occur, but which ones come first, which ones come second. And that became an overlay of the 10-minute walk, as well as what we were hearing from the community and the citizens themselves. So focus area number versus priority number became very key in laying them out and putting the numbers to them so we knew how much we had to fundraise, what was the cost, who are the people in there, the trail type itself, if it's natural trail, sidewalk, multimodal, and if it needed future study, or if we were set to go, we had enough to do in and of itself. This became the map that then we can take and have the realistic conversations of how do we get this to accomplish and what is standing in our way to do so within each of those priority zones.
Yeah, and it really does allow me, you know, I mentioned it earlier, but part of the plan, the goal is that TPL, we have 5 people on staff in Dallas. We love 5 Mile Creek. It's definitely like 80% of my job, but we have a whole schoolyards program here too. And, you know, our whole goal here is to provide opportunities for other people to be doing this work also. And so, you know, I can have a colleague of mine from another nonprofit who's really focused on trails call me and say, hey, there's a a release out, there's a request for proposals out for a trail that connects, it needs to connect this type of institution. Is there anything like that in 5 Mile Creek? Would it connect to the circuit, or would it connect to a different part of Dallas? And we can easily say, let me pull up the plan. Yes, these 3 trails are currently not built. This is how much we think that they would cost at this, this year amount. And they connect these institutions, and that has been really successful with working with the city.
Then to sum it all up, we did do the pretty map picture. Everybody kind of needs it. You'll see the bubble of what would be those 4 big new parks, not identified, but within a range and a zone. And, just showing the overlay of the connectiveness between these trail systems and the watershed in and of itself. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, and I'll say, here we're getting close to the end of the presentation. I definitely want to take some questions, but I have to, again, tip my hat to TPG and all the work that we got to do together, because they did this work pro bono. We had a very small grant, I think $50,000 for the entire staff time to go into this project. And we were able to raise half of $3.7 million to purchase a 40-acre site from this plan within a year and a half from completing it. We are finalizing the purchase of that 90-acre parcel that I said. We are building a park that is going to open in the fall. And on that, the first piece that I mentioned, where TBG and TPL are currently working on more detailed engagement to design that piece, and it's basically already funded. It'll be the phase 1 will be a $2.2 to $3 million park project that, we already have the majority of the phase 1 funding for because of the plan, which is hugely important. But you'll see here, this is a equity map for City of Dallas of equity indicators. We talk a lot about the engagement and just how beautiful the corridor is and how much people want trails, but we really did use data to get to this, why we're working in this corridor, and it's a huge opportunity for green infrastructure. We have a whole different presentation we do on smart growth, but we have a GIS mapping platform that allows us to look at the 10-minute walk, equity and connectivity priorities, stormwater priorities, all sorts of stuff, everything pointed towards this is an area that we feel could really use that impact. And the equity map really mirrors the health map and the health outcomes that are determined by the zip codes that we live in. Do you have access to food? Are you next to industrial uses, or is there a huge amount of pediatric asthma in your zip code, which is the #1 cause of absenteeism in schools? Is there enough trees absorbing that particulate matter or keeping it from being really hot? Those are the things that we do think about in these planning mechanisms, and we do talk about with communities. And I think that this map pretty significantly highlights how much the equity criteria we look at does come into play in this corridor. And so this shows the trail system, the loop system. 5 Mile Creek, when the loop is complete, will tie into the circuit trail, which is a large trail system that connects a lot of parts of Dallas through a large loop. From an equity perspective, we need that double loop. We need to connect the southern part of the city. We need to connect the people who want those connections to, and we continue to work on both park and trail access to make those connections happen.
Opportunities, we've talked about them a little bit, is some working on. We've done a series of community engagement for just this parcel in and of itself and what they want to be. And as we were planning process, it's changed. show you that 2 years ago might change a lot. And then wellness trend her team is working on independently as well. Should be getting built any day now. So we'll see.
So
Leave time.
yeah.
We can talk forever.
Yeah, we can. This is I mean, it's a 100-page document, so we can talk about it for a very long time. I saw one question that I just want to answer very quickly about what types of engagement really work with communities. It's different in every neighborhood. I mentioned that. I think that we could talk for hours about the individual conversations or things that we had. I find that the most success I have in engagement activities is having like coffee conversations or like coffee design sessions, like sitting around a table. I would highly recommend the book Design as Democracy. It's a book that's edited by landscape architects about different engagement techniques. And we, in this particular plan, we did not have big town hall meetings where people raise their hand like Parks and Rec, although we do have those sometimes, and tell us, you know, I have this concern, I have that concern. We did have the opportunity for that, but we had like open house stations where people came in for any time in a 2-hour period and rotated around stations and talked to one of us and did an activity about the vision that they wanted in their corridor. And you know, I'm happy to email people that have questions about those techniques or, but Design as Democracy is a great book and you should check it out.
Thank you so much for such an incredible talk, Jodi and Molly. We do have some questions here. The first question I got is, what design elements do you use to connect neighborhoods to these green spaces?
From my standpoint, those design elements are really the physical connections of sidewalks, trailheads, parking, the pieces that allow people to engage with it. If I can get you there, and then we provide the additional elements the community tells us, it will be successful. So to me, we need connections by sidewalks and connections for our vehicles to make it there. Otherwise, it just becomes cumbersome to attend. We have to make it easy for them.
Yeah, I think that like we always think about like what's a groundbreaking design idea, but like, you know, if we could really just have good sidewalks in every city, I think that that's pretty groundbreaking. Not to be cynical, but I think that making sure the sidewalks are accessible, 1, 2, if you have the opportunity to use creative placemaking or painting or something that is unique to that neighborhood to direct people to a park space. And then 3, trees, like find an organization or your organization, figure out if there's a tree planting program, are there enough trees? Does the community want trees? You definitely need to ask that because not all communities do. But that really does provide that like visual connection to get people there and more comfort.
Thank you for the response. The second question we got here is, how do we create more walkable communities or cities when most communities or cities have already been designed to require automobiles to access necessary places such as grocery stores and recreation, etc.?
I would look, cities are doing more to make walkable. We all understand the importance now of it. Dallas itself is extremely car-centric, and it's been very difficult to get some of those transportation engineers to understand when we add bike lanes and walk lanes, we're giving more access to people more often and more readily. A lot of the trails that we've started to implement in the cities are under easements or along floodplains that can't be used for automobiles. So we're grabbing those places where we know that the cars can't go and making those accessible to people. And they become a better patchwork than the roads that are overlaid the city grid systems.
I would also say be an advocate. Don't just be a landscape architect.
Yeah.
Go out, learn about land use zoning, and like think about when you're thinking about urban development And when we think about walkable new communities that people are building and that are hip and cool that we all want to go to, and what do those have in them? They have mixed uses. They don't just have houses. They don't just have people driving back and forth and going to their garage and never seeing each other. You know, in Dallas, that's a huge hurdle that we have to advocate for, is that you know, it is as silly as it is, people need a restaurant to go celebrate their birthday at, close to their neighborhood. People need a library, people need a trail. I think land use, I think that's my personal, I mean, I think it's my opinion, but land use is really important to walkability and, you know, providing a mix of things. And I cannot stress enough, if you're in that situation or you're on a project, like go to the planning and zoning department, talk to the council person's office if it's in your neighborhood. That's what really makes changes, is go to planning and zoning meetings. And, you know, make sure that you're advocating for your community to get the grocery store they want and not the cigarette store on the corner, unless they want that. But in my case, I have been asked to go advocate against a liquor store moving in because people wanted a grocery store or something that was more community oriented. Yeah.
Okay, although we do have other questions, we are at the end of our
organizations. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I think you cut in and out.
Oh, dang it. Can you hear me now, Molly?
Yeah.
Okay, I would say partnerships with engineers and organizations, the more we can infiltrate ourselves in those groups and find individuals who have the same passions as us, we can come together and fight harder for what we know is right. So finding the other people who have the same passions as you and infiltrating those groups will eventually change it.
Thank you. Okay, although we do have other questions, we are at the end of our session today. Thank you again, Jodi and Molly, and thank you everyone for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you all.
Thank you all, appreciate the time.
Yeah, and reach out with those questions if you have them. We appreciate hearing those and learning from you guys too.
We could talk for hours, Molly and I, about this stuff.
We're happy to talk. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you both. Have a good day.
You too.